He thought he knew everything about his land, about his past, about the man who raised him, but nothing could prepare him for what his dog led him to, a secret buried beneath the barn, hidden in silence and soaked in sorrow. For weeks, the dog stared at the same spot every single night, unmoving, as if it saw something no one else could. And when the rancher finally decided to dig, he uncovered a truth so dark, so horrifying, that it shattered everything he believed about his family and himself. This is not just a story about a barn. It's a story about betrayal, buried voices, and the unbreakable bond between a man and the only creature who knew the truth all along. What was buried there didn't just haunt the ranch. It tore open a past no one ever dared to question until now. It began on a cold September evening, just after sunset, when rancher Thomas Granger first noticed something strange. His dog, Buck, a loyal German shepherd who'd never left his side in 10 years, was sitting stiff and silent in the dirt, his eyes fixed on the old barn at the edge of the field. The barn hadn't been used in years. Its wood was weathered, its roof sagged, and its doors creaked with the wind like a whisper of forgotten things. At first, Thomas thought maybe a raccoon or fox had slipped inside, but Buck wasn't barking or growling. He just stared, unblinking, motionless. Thomas called his name once. Buck didn't respond. Called again. Still nothing. It wasn't until Thomas walked over and touched his collar that the dog finally moved, slowly turning his head and walking back toward the porch, but with several backward glances. That night, Thomas went to bed with an odd feeling in his chest. He'd seen animals behave strangely before, but Buck's silence, that haunted stillness, felt different. The next night, it happened again. And the night after. Every evening, just after the sun dipped behind the hills, Buck would walk toward the barn, sit at the exact same spot, and stare without blinking. Not a sound, not a movement, just fixed eyes, pointed at that rotting building like he was waiting for something or someone. By the fifth night, Thomas felt a tightness in his chest every time it started. He tried calling the vet, but Buck wasn't sick. His heart rate was steady, reflexes normal, appetite unchanged. It was like the dog knew something that couldn't be explained by science or instinct. Thomas had inherited the land from his father, who had died 5 years earlier under what some in the town called unusual circumstances. His father, Leonard Granger, had been a hard man, strict, private. He never let anyone go near the barn. Not neighbors, not workers, not even Thomas. He always said it was unsafe, that the floorboards were weak and the roof would collapse. Thomas believed him. But now, as Buck returned every single night, never missing a minute, never wavering, Thomas couldn't ignore the feeling growing in his gut, that the barn wasn't just old. It was hiding something. One morning, just before sunrise, Thomas grabbed a flashlight and walked out to the barn while Buck was still asleep. The dew was thick on the grass, and the air carried a chill that bit through his jacket. He pushed open the barn door slowly, the hinges groaning like they hadn't moved in decades. Inside, the smell hit him first: dust, mold, and something faintly metallic. The beams above were covered in cobwebs. Rusted tools hung on crooked nails. Stacks of rotten hay leaned against the far wall. Nothing looked immediately out of place. But Thomas felt it again, that feeling. Like the air itself was thicker in there. Like someone was watching. He stepped forward, careful not to crack the fragile boards beneath him. In the far corner, he saw something strange. A small pile of dirt, unevenly packed. It didn't match the rest of the floor, which was solid. This corner looked disturbed. He crouched down, touched the earth. Loose. Fresh. Recently dug, maybe? He didn't say a word, just stood up slowly and walked out, locking the barn behind him. That night, Buck returned to his post and stared once more, this time with a low, almost inaudible whine in his throat. Thomas couldn't sleep. He tossed, turned, sat up, laid down. Around 2 a.m., he grabbed a shovel, a lantern, and headed back to the barn. Buck followed close behind, tail low, ears alert. When they reached the spot, the dog let out a soft bark, just once, and sat beside him. Thomas took a deep breath, set the lantern down, and began to dig. The first few inches were easy. Loose soil. Dry. Then the shovel hit something hard. Not stone. Not wood. Something else. He cleared more dirt, hand shaking. The light flickered across a shape, rounded, smooth, pale. His stomach twisted. He dropped to his knees and used his hands now, brushing away the earth until a face emerged. A skull. Human. Empty eye sockets stared up at him through the dirt. Thomas staggered back, breath frozen in his lungs. Buck didn't move, just kept staring, his body tense, unmoving. Thomas turned, grabbed the lantern, and examined more of the pit. Bones. Small ones. Several. Not just one body. Maybe two. Maybe more. The barn was a grave. He stumbled outside, bile rising in his throat, legs weak, heart pounding like it might burst. He called the sheriff at dawn, barely able to get the words out. When they came, they found what Thomas already knew but couldn't say aloud. 2 full skeletons, buried side by side. A child and a woman. Their clothes had rotted, but one thing remained. A small silver locket clutched in the woman's hand, with initials engraved LG. Leonard Granger. Thomas's father. His world cracked open like a shell. Memories came flooding back. His father's odd behavior, the locked shed, the screaming he thought he'd imagined as a boy. The nights when the barn lights were on, even though no one was allowed inside. All of it suddenly made sense, and none of it did. Who were they? Why were they buried there? And why had his father, his strict, God-fearing father, done this? As the police began their investigation, Buck sat beside the barn one last time, silent, still, and when they carried the remains away, the dog finally turned and walked back toward the porch, never looking back. The investigation unearthed more than bones. It unearthed secrets Thomas Granger never imagined were tied to his family name. For 2 days, forensic teams combed the barn, taking samples, scanning soil layers, and extracting every fragment they could find. They confirmed the victims, a woman in her early 30s and a girl, no older than 10. The coroner estimated they'd been dead for more than 20 years. The locket found clutched in the woman's skeletal hand was traced to a limited jeweler in Kentucky, custom made. The initials LG weren't for Leonard Granger, but for Lila Garrison, a woman reported missing with her daughter, Sophie, back in 1999. Thomas sat in his kitchen, staring at the police file laid out in front of him. Pictures, reports, newspaper clippings. Lila Garrison had worked at a diner in town. She was quiet, kind, lived in a trailer on the outskirts. People said she had a tough life, but adored her daughter. Then one night, both vanished. No sign, no struggle, just gone. A case gone cold, buried by time, until Buck found them, without ever touching the dirt. Thomas couldn't shake the storm inside his chest. Every time he looked in the mirror, he saw his father's face carved into his own. That heavy jaw, that deep-set stare, the same lines on the forehead. He remembered how his father used to disappear for hours without explanation, how he'd fly into rage when someone asked about the past. And now, the past had clawed its way back up from beneath the floorboards. When detectives asked if Leonard ever knew Lila, Thomas hesitated. He didn't want to say it, but he remembered. Years ago, he saw her once, crying outside the barn while his father yelled at her to leave. Thomas had been barely a teenager, too afraid to speak up. Back then, he thought it was some argument about trespassing, but now he realized it wasn't. That woman was pleading, and she never left that barn. They searched Leonard's belongings, digging through storage sheds, safes, old ledgers. In one weathered notebook, buried beneath tax records, they found a single torn page. Scrawled in Leonard's jagged handwriting were 4 words that sent a chill through the sheriff's office. No one will find them. That was all it said. No names, no dates, but everyone knew what it meant. Thomas barely spoke for days. The guilt consumed him. The house felt heavier. The silence became unbearable. But Buck, faithful as ever, remained by his side. One night, as a thunderstorm rolled across the hills, Thomas sat on the porch, staring out toward the barn. Rain lashed the roof. Lightning split the sky. And through the flashes, he saw Buck, standing not at the barn this time, but at the woodshed behind the house. Thomas stood, heart pounding. The woodshed, another place his father kept locked his entire life. Thomas had never dared go inside. He walked slowly, feet soaked in rain, lantern in hand. Buck didn't move, just stood there, tail still, eyes fixed on the door. Thomas reached for the rusted handle. It was jammed. He kicked it. The old wood groaned and finally gave way. Inside, the smell hit him like a punch. Damp old oil, something deeper, something rotten. His lantern lit up stacks of crates, broken shelves, an old freezer in the corner. He opened the first crate, rags, tools, chains. Then another, duct tape, plastic wrap, and a thick black notebook sealed in plastic. His fingers trembled as he opened it. Inside were dozens of pages, each with notes, drawings, maps, names, women's names, dates, details, routines. One name was underlined in red, Lila Garrison. Notes beside her name read, "Comes alone, brings daughter, obeys orders." A shiver crawled down Thomas's spine. Another name was listed below, with a note, "Changed locks, too loud, watch from distance." These weren't just memories. These were plans. His father had stalked them. Every single one. He flipped page after page, feeling like his soul was being stripped raw. These weren't just isolated crimes. Leonard had been watching, waiting, planning, and no one knew. Not the town, not his friends, not even his own son. The man who raised him, who taught him how to shoot, farm, work with his hands, was a predator hiding in plain sight. As Thomas stood there, drenched in horror, Buck let out a low growl. Not aggressive, protective, alert. He turned toward the back of the shed, where a tarp hung over a shallow pit. Thomas pulled it aside, revealing an old trapdoor built into the ground. It had a lock, rusted, broken. He pried it open. A wooden ladder led down into darkness. He shouldn't have gone down. Every part of him screamed to stop, but he descended slowly, lantern trembling in his hand. The air grew colder with every step. When his boots hit the dirt floor, he saw them. Claw marks on the wall, old ropes, stains no rain could wash away. This wasn't just a shed. It was a cell, a place of torment. He fell to his knees, breath ragged, the truth collapsing on him like the ceiling of his entire life had caved in. This wasn't a ranch. It was a graveyard built by a monster, and he was his son. When he came back up, morning had broken. The sheriff returned within the hour. They closed off the woodshed, opened a full-scale investigation, and reclassified Leonard Granger as a serial offender. News cameras showed up. Reporters flooded the gate. Headlines called it the Barnyard Horror. But none of them knew what it felt like to be the child of the man who did this. None of them knew what it was like to hear the walls whisper at night. Thomas sat in the living room, Buck by his side, staring at nothing. Everything he thought he knew had turned to ash. He hadn't buried the truth. It had always been buried, beneath the barn, beneath the woodshed, beneath years of silence and denial. And now that it had come up, it wouldn't go back down. But something still didn't sit right. The way Buck stared for weeks, not at the woodshed, but only at the barn, as if the barn held more than bones, more than secrets, something unfinished, something waiting. Thomas couldn't ignore it anymore. Even with the investigation ongoing, with crime scene tape wrapped around his property, and strangers whispering his family name like it carried disease, the feeling gnawed at him that the worst wasn't over, that the truth hadn't been fully uncovered. Every night, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Buck would once again walk silently to the edge of the barn, sit down, and stare with the same haunting stillness, as if something was still calling. And then it happened. 3 nights after the shed had been sealed, Thomas awoke to Buck barking, loud, urgent, different. Not the bark of warning or fear, but of command. Thomas bolted from bed, heart hammering. He grabbed a flashlight and ran barefoot through the wet grass. Buck wasn't at the shed this time. He was at the barn, growling low, pawing at the floor near the corner where the bodies had been found. Thomas hesitated. That section had already been dug out. Forensics had cleared it. But Buck insisted, digging, barking, snarling now like he'd lost control. Thomas dropped to his knees and scraped the surface with his hands. The soil had shifted. It looked like it had collapsed slightly, like something deeper was buried beneath the original graves. He ran to get his shovel. He dug for what felt like hours. ignoring the cold, the sweat, the burn in his shoulders. Inch by inch, the earth gave way until the shovel hit something else, metal. A box. Small. Rusted shut. He cleared the soil around it, lifted it with both hands, and placed it under the lantern's beam. The box was sealed with 2 rusted latches. He pried them open, and the lid creaked back. Inside, wrapped in decayed velvet, lay a collection of items. A child's shoe. A torn photograph of a smiling girl with a missing tooth. A lock of hair. And beneath them, a stack of letters, each addressed to my son. Thomas's hands trembled as he unfolded the first one. If you are reading this, then I am already dead. I don't ask for forgiveness, because I know I deserve none. But I ask you to understand what made me a monster. My sins began long before you were born, long before this barn became a grave. And you, Thomas, you were never supposed to be part of it. Each letter peeled back a layer of horror. Leonard Granger had lived a double life. Outwardly, a respected rancher, a father, a man of the land. But behind closed doors, he'd been consumed by obsession, twisted by grief, driven by a madness that started after Thomas's mother died. Except, according to the letters, she didn't die in an accident. Leonard killed her, in a jealous rage, and buried her beneath the barn. That was the first grave. Lila Garrison and her daughter weren't the first victims. They were the last. And Thomas, unknowingly, had grown up playing on the ground above the place where his mother's bones had slept in silence. He dropped the letters, choking on tears, his mind spiraling in disbelief. Everything he'd ever known had been built on lies. Every memory, every Sunday breakfast, every Christmas around the fireplace, all of it balanced on the silence of the dead beneath the floorboards. Buck whined beside him, nudging his hand gently with his nose. Even now, the dog remained his anchor. Thomas rose slowly, numb and hollow, and walked to the farthest corner of the barn. He began digging again, deeper, past the known grave site. Hours passed. His hands blistered. The sun rose. And then he found it, a third skeleton. This one smaller, female, with a gold wedding band still clinging to one finger. The initials TG etched inside. Teresa Granger. His mother. Thomas collapsed. He didn't scream, didn't cry. He just knelt beside her, his heart shattered beyond repair. Buck lay at his side, resting his head on Thomas's knee, eyes finally closing, not in sorrow, but in peace. By the time authorities arrived again, Thomas had already turned over the letters, the photograph, the ring. The headlines exploded. Granger family mass grave uncovered. Ranch of shadows. Son of serial killer uncovers final victims. But none of it mattered to Thomas anymore. Not the news, not the pitying looks from neighbors, not even the TV vans parked outside his gate. What mattered was truth, that the dead were no longer buried in silence, that their stories were no longer hidden beneath rotting wood and broken soil. A month later, Thomas stood before 3 graves in the town cemetery. One for his mother, one for Lila, and one for little Sophie. He placed fresh roses on each. Buck sat quietly at his feet. The wind rustled through the trees, soft and warm. For the first time in his life, Thomas felt like he could breathe. That night, he burned the barn to the ground, watched as flames lit the sky, consuming every inch of darkness his father had left behind. It wasn't just wood that burned, it was history, secrets, and the curse that had haunted his bloodline. Ashes scattered into the sky, and with them, a heavy weight lifted from his shoulders. Buck never stared again. He rested beside the porch like he used to, eyes soft, peaceful. Whatever had drawn him to the barn, whatever had haunted him night after night, had finally been released. But some nights, when the wind howls just right, and the moonlight hits the field in a certain way, Thomas still hears something. A voice? A whisper? He's not sure. Maybe it's the past, echoing like footsteps on hollow ground. Or maybe it's the spirits, finally speaking, not to torment, but to thank him. Because sometimes, justice doesn't come from a courtroom. Sometimes, it comes from a dog who refuses to stop staring. Months passed, but the shadows never fully left. Thomas repaired the fences, tended to the cattle, and kept the land running. but something inside him had changed forever. The world saw a survivor. He felt like a witness, one who had stared into the face of darkness and lived to tell it. The barn was gone, its ashes now mixed with the soil, but its memory was carved into every sunrise, every breeze that passed through the empty field. He didn't talk much after it all. The neighbors tried to comfort him. Some brought food, others left letters. But Thomas didn't need words. What he needed was silence, the kind that let him hear the truth he'd buried all his life. The kind of silence that let him feel the weight of every soul that once cried out from under his feet. That was the only sound that made sense now. Every morning, Buck walked beside him across the field. Not once did the dog return to the place where the barn stood. He didn't need to. His work was done. He had carried the truth when no one else could. And now he finally rested. There was peace in his eyes. The same peace Thomas searched for in the mirror each day, trying to find a face that didn't look like his father's. One evening, Thomas sat under the old oak tree near the hill, where the sky burned gold as the sun set behind the ranch. Buck lay next to him, tail flicking gently, eyes half closed. Thomas whispered, not to the dog, not to the wind, but to the ones buried deep beneath time and silence. I'm sorry I didn't see it. I'm sorry I didn't know. But I promise, you're not forgotten anymore. A soft gust of wind rustled the tall grass. It felt like a reply, a whisper of peace, a sign that the past had heard him. He looked out over the land his father once ruled with cruelty and fear. But now it was his, not just by blood, but by truth. And he would honor it, not with silence, not with shame, but with honesty, with the courage to face what others would rather forget. Because sometimes healing doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from remembering, from digging up what's been buried, from facing the truth, no matter how painful it is. As the stars blinked into the night sky, Thomas stood, brushed the dust from his jeans, and walked back to the house with Buck by his side. No more whispers, no more secrets, just footsteps on clean ground and a soul finally free.